Hi there, this is Alec Hogg bringing you the Davos Deliberations Webcast. Well, it's 2 weeks ago that we were in the icy climes of the highest town in Europe at the World Economic Forum, and I came back with an enormous amount of new insights, more understandings. Happy to actually be living here in South Africa rather than some other places in the world. And it also tends to put things into perspective. If there were three big issues that I often think about a lot that came through, the one is that geopolitics is now front and center around the world. The second one is that a big issue is inclusive growth. And the third one is the oil dividend and quantitative easing and what that will mean for the world economy going forward. But I've got a lovely presentation for you, so stay with us while we pick up on the Davos deliberations. I'll be bringing that across. How does that look? Beautiful. Okay, just to start off with just bear with me for a minute, please. With the first of the slides. What is the World Economic Forum? Well, I like this slide very much because in the center is Klaus Schwab and his wife Hilda. He's an interesting man, a polymath, the youngest ever professor at Geneva University. He decided 45 years ago that he would put together a conference or a gathering of people. Primarily then it was business. Today it's expanded to include political leaders, people from academia, some people from the media, and get them talking, get them exposed to each other's ideas. And the World Economic Forum itself has recently been graduated to the same status as the Red Cross, the World Health Organization. It's a multinational organization, NGO, based in Switzerland, and they've got special privileges that come with that. In fact, it happened on the Friday of this year's annual meeting that the WEF itself was graduated to this highly esteemed position. There are 600 young people who work for the World Economic Forum. So although most of the world focuses its attention on the WEF in Davos in January, through the rest of the year, they have sub-fora. There is an African summit. There's a summit in China, in other parts of the world as well, Middle East, Latin America. But the big one is at Davos, and those 600 people who work there primarily analyze the state of the world, do their research into issues, risk issues that could knock us off course. If we know the risks better, we can deal with them a lot more sensibly. And also they come up with a list of the big risks in the world. And those are the criteria that are then focused upon at the 5 days that the World Economic Forum gets together in Davos. Why Davos? Well, it's remote. It's the highest town in Europe. It's this makes it easy to defend, easy to keep out people who might want to come and cause mischief. There are only 2,500 who are invited to the World Economic Forum every year. So the numbers are capped and limited. They bring an enormous number of support staff with them. I estimate together with spouses and supporters of the CEOs and chairmen who come from business world and clearly from the government, the presidents, prime ministers and cabinet ministers, there must be easily another 5 times as many. So you're probably talking about 30,000 people who descend onto Davos for that last week in January. Its ability to be well defended from terrorism attacks has become increasingly important in the world that we're now living in. How it works is essentially drawing together a magnet of people who are at the pinnacle of their own careers. It comes across all different racial groups, cultural groups. There you see will.i.am, who this year I think made his first appearance, Marissa Mayer, who's there at about 4 o'clock. She is sorry, at about 8 o'clock. She is the CEO of Yahoo and was a regular attendee during her time at Google. Angelina Jolie has attended, Charlize Theron, Muhammad Ali, Matt Damon, Bill and Melinda Gates are regulars. And it's almost as though the powerful and the rich go there because the powerful and the rich go there. It feeds on itself. This year, for instance, the opening ceremony was punctuated by songs from Andrea Bocelli, the wonderful tenor, who is himself not just a tenor, not just an artist, but having gone blind at a young age, an activist for helping to eradicate blindness around the world. So that's how it works. You get heads of state who get together to understand and hear what the private sector is saying, and the private sector to engage in an informal arrangement with heads of state. Over the years, the WEF has managed to identify a number of trends before they became mainstream. One of those that was quite obvious for me was the whole climate change debate. Al Gore once again was there this year. He's a regular attender at Davos, the man who, of course, popularized climate change through An Inconvenient Truth, the movie. This year also we saw Bertrand Piccard, a Swiss explorer who I met for the first time in 2009 when I facilitated a session on unusual people like himself and Jane Goodall and Mike Useem, who is a leadership professor at Wharton, who takes his students to base camp in Everest to teach them leadership lessons. Jane Goodall, of course, is the lady who's transformed our thinking about animals, the chimp lady, as most people know. But Bertrand Piccard was back again this year, and that was ahead of launching a project which would again focus attention on climate change. He has built an aircraft which has a 76-meter wingspan. Now that's the size of a jumbo 747. It only weighs 150 kilograms, and this aircraft is powered totally by solar power. So no fuel, no jet fuel, no electricity, nothing else. It's just solar power. And he is in the process of circumnavigating, or will be in the process of circumnavigating the Earth in this incredible machine. The idea is showing that if you can fly around the world in a solar-powered aeroplane, then you can apply solar power to many other things. Of course, green energy, being supported very heavily there by ABB, who believe their credo is to decouple economic growth from environmental pollution. Again, right in the forefront is at the World Economic Forum. Another issue that came out early on was social media. Indeed, over the years, Eric Schmidt from Google, the chairman, is a regular participant in Davos. Sergey Brin and Larry Page have been there a few times as well. The founder of YouTube, Hurley, the founder of Skype, Tumblr, Flickr, you name it. They were there. This year, Jack Ma from Alibaba was in attendance, and I also got to talk to someone directly from our industry, Henry Blodgett, who's launched a very innovative Business Insider. I opened a Twitter account in 2008. Today, that doesn't, everybody seems to have a Twitter account, but in 2008, it was something new. Why did I know about it? The World Economic Forum. So they managed to identify trends long before they become mainstream. What happened at the 2015 meeting? Well, geopolitical risks were on the top of the agenda. In fact, for the first time, top members of military intelligence operations came to Davos. There were 44 heads of state at the World Economic Forum this year, a record. Previous record was 38, and that was in 2009 at the height of the global financial crisis. Why were there so many heads of state in attendance? Well, because they're looking for answers. And that tends to be the case at the WEF when nobody really knows what the future holds, when they are unsure about directions and paths to follow. Then even the heads of state and the politicians will come there to try and find more direction, more insights, do more listening, perhaps, than they might ordinarily do. This was also the 25th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. So a good opportunity for everybody involved to look back on what the globalization wave has brought, good and bad, in the last 25 years. It made for a fascinating meeting. I'm a member of what is called the Global Agenda, well, the Global Media Council, and this is a very small group of people drawn from media companies around the world who get together and are given a special program. And this year, one of the first people that we got to engage with was the gentleman in picture here, Petro Poroshenko, in a very well-attended session. I think there are about 80 members of this IMC. There must have been 50 there, which is most unusual because there are many competing things on the agenda at any one time. We were told by Poroshenko how things had developed in the Ukraine. There are now 9,500 Russian troops, he says, in his country, with 600 tanks. The Minsk memorandum, which was signed 4 months ago by obviously Ukraine itself, the rebels who are backed by Russia. Russia as well signed the Minsk memorandum that provided boundaries which everybody was supposed to stick to. Well, according to the president of Ukraine, the Russians have not stuck to those boundaries. They have captured another 550 square kilometers, and time is now, he believes, working against Putin. He does not like Putin. He describes him as an emperor, and he believes that Ukraine is defending not only its own country, but the entire world of global security. One of the things that came up, remember this was only a couple of weeks after the attack in Paris, which got the French people wearing little symbols on there. If you look closely there, you'll see there's he's got a symbol on his jacket, and that is to commemorate for Ukrainians something similar to what happened with the Charlie Hebdo massacre. In this case, there were troops, Russian troops, and who in the occupied territory, as they call it in Ukraine, who sent a missile into a Ukrainian town and blew up a bus with children in it, 28 children there, 14 of whom died instantly and the rest being very badly injured. And they're now carrying these badges in the same way as you have Je suis Charlie in France. They have Je suis and the name of the town where this atrocity occurred. Also at the 2015 meeting, another geopolitical issue that was brought to the forefront is Libya. And we had the privilege of a small group meeting with Ali Takuni, who was a member of the leadership of the Arab Spring. He's the guy on the left-hand side with the purple tie. He referred to this fellow on the right-hand side, who is quite recognizable, the late President Gaddafi of Libya. And in essence, Libya is going through a very difficult time at the moment. He describes it as a backdoor of the fight against ISIS, the Islamic State. It has no police force, it has no army, it has become a magnet for radicals. And the reason it has none of the normal institutions was that Gaddafi built a system where he was a strong leader and he had very weak institutions around him. Makes one think a little of South Africa. Said Ali Takuni in our discussions, when we took over, there was nothing there. What they do know, though, is that they managed to identify $200 billion. The mind boggles at the numbers, but $200 billion of money that Gaddafi took out of the country that they know of, that has been frozen in bank accounts around the world. And they understand that there is at least another $200 billion that is available to the country at some point in time. They will no doubt be looking in South Africa, where Gaddafi, it's pretty well known, owned the Village Walk shopping center, which has recently been demolished to make a place for another to come through. What they're doing at the moment, Takuni, is the Libyan version of the South African CODESA meetings, where people from various parts of the political spectrum have come together to write a new constitution. But there are many who don't want this constitution to be written. And he told us that there'd been 6 car bombs very close to the building where the constitution is being written. So difficult times in Libya. Something that is interesting there, the Libyan oil supply has now dropped to just 200,000 barrels a day from a peak of 1.6 million barrels a day. So when one sees Libya normalizing, you can expect further inputs coming on oil. And that was another big subject, not just the oil price, but the Middle East. During the World Economic Forum, the King of Saudi Arabia, who's pictured there, passed away. That is been interpreted as bringing in a whole new issue, political issue, into the Middle East. Also, we had the chance to meet with Ahmed Davutoglu, who is the Prime Minister of Turkey. And he was saying that the Islamic State has to be eliminated. It's more of a threat to Turkey than anyone else. And clearly the geopolitics in the Middle East, Libya included, are at a stage where the world needs to be paying very close attention. What Mr. Davutoglu, I got his pronunciation fairly right, had to say was that we'd have two types of Islam, urban Islam and tribal Islam. And at the moment, it appears as though tribal Islam is where the Islamic State is drawing its people from. Moving on to the next big issue rather, and that's to do with inclusive growth. Now, it's something in South Africa that we've been dealing with for some years now. The idea being that the more people you can bring in to the growth prospect, the better and more sustainable your growth is. Swedish Prime Minister, who's pictured here, met with us and gave us some insights into how it works in Sweden. And his view was that if the world were to bring in just women, give them equal opportunities, GDP in the world would grow by 12% more. Inclusive growth was an issue that I focused on for the Guardian newspaper, and there are a few photographs from one of the sessions that I attended there. The lady down the bottom is Helen Clark, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, and she had some very interesting things to say about the way that the world has actually, income disparities have actually not moved much in the developing world. Remember, this is the part of the world that is expanding most rapidly. In her view, where 75% of the people in the developing world are actually worse off than they were in 1990, going back to the fall of the Berlin Wall. This gentleman over here, his name is Robert Johnson. He used to be a hedge fund manager for the George Soros organization. And he made headlines in a story that I quoted him on, where he said that hedge fund managers all over the world are buying themselves airstrips and farms in places like New Zealand because they believe, due to income disparities and the unstable situation it's creating, that they need a getaway car. This at the top is Rebecca Newberger Goldstein, who has been a professor since the age of 26. She's an author and a historian, and she had some very interesting things to say on an optimistic basis about inclusive growth and income disparities and how they are eventually, we as a species, as a human species, do develop to do the right thing. And she used slavery as an example. Some of her heroes, Plato, going back to ancient Greece, never saw anything wrong in non-Greeks being enslaved. But of course, today that's an abhorrent process to anyone in the world. And then Jim Wallace, who's a great friend of South Africa. As you can see, he's wearing a South African scarf. He's the man who closed the Davos meeting last year. He had a lot to say about Ferguson. All of these, you can get more information on. I interviewed 3 of these people anyway. Their interviews on the biznews.com website. Still going with the theme of inclusive growth, which really is now becoming a major issue for businesses, for countries around the world. Phumzile, our former president, deputy president here in South Africa, Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, is one of the stars of the United Nations, one of the stars of Davos, and she's a very outspoken person on the subject of gender equality. Similarly, I did a lovely interview with her, which you can read on BizNews. But primarily what she did, or what she explained to us she had done, is an organization called He for She, which between her time of working in the presidency here in South Africa and taking on her new role at the United Nations, where she drives the global gender equality agenda, what she did was go and do a mobile technology doctorate. And by doing the doctorate, she understood far more about social media and how to use it. And she then launched He for She. And at one point at the launch, they had 1 billion people around the world who were engaged on the platform for the first time. Quite a lady. She referred to the man to the left there, Paul Kagame, as being a role model for Africa. Rwanda, the country that Kagame runs, decided after the genocide that it had to do something unusual. And in its constitution, it wrote that 30% of the cabinet posts had to go to female. And it has worked so well that today, nearly 2/3 of the members of parliament are women in Rwanda. And they're doing a pretty good job of it as well. Last year, Rwanda grew at 7.5%, its GDP rate. And that's without any oil that's been to support it. And there's a lady who's done an enormous amount for this. That's Melinda Gates. Again, looking at a glass half full, she believes that because of technology, this is, of course, the other side of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the wife of the founder of Microsoft. She says both she and Bill believe because of technology that the poor are going to have the best 15 years ever. Technology will assist in improving their situation in the 15 years ahead. This is an interesting slide. One of the smartest people that I had the privilege of meeting was Dr. Kim, the head of the World Bank. And he is shaking up the World Bank to a large degree. We did have a Chatham House rules discussion, so there wasn't a lot that I can really report back to you, but I'm sure he wouldn't be unhappy for me to just repeat the point he made to us, that the World Bank is now looking at different criteria. His research has shown that it is impossible, given the way that wealthy people can spread their wealth anywhere around the world, for the World Bank, or anybody for that matter, to define exactly how much money the rich have. So instead of going with the old Gini coefficients, which takes the income disparity between the rich and the poor, he says rather they're looking now at the bottom 40% of earners and making sure that the growth by those people is faster, the growth in their wealth is faster than economic growth. A good point that he made as well was that the World Bank is working with countries where they find people they can work with. He used the example of working very closely with India and Mexico, two countries that are expanding very rapidly on an economic growth basis. But most of the engagement is not on what one used to see from the World Bank, which was give us your money. It's now focusing on what can you help us with through your knowledge. The World Bank employs 2,000 PhDs, and these are the people who are in demand now, helping countries to help themselves. Also with inclusive growth, I put the slide up here about Switzerland because this is a country that is #1 in the world on its ability to attract and retain talent. It has an unemployment rate of 3.4%, which is pretty good, given that you can't really get below 3%. But more important than that, its youth unemployment rate is also 3.4%. And the reason for this, we were told by a couple of the experts who were unpacking this to perhaps give us a bit of a role model, is that the young people in Switzerland are encouraged at school to go out and work. And indeed, they are discouraged to go to university with a cap of only 18% of the population allowed into university. When I say discouraged, that means that there is only a certain number of people who go there. The others are encouraged to go into the workforce. And that brings what they call vocational exposure. In other words, they're learning skills by having on-the-job training. It is Another point that's been brought out on all of this, and particularly on the youth, was by the chief executive of Adecco, which is a company that places 1 million people a day. And he said it's a fallacy that the youth in Europe, in fact, anywhere, don't want to work. Their research shows that on average, an unemployed young person in Europe sends out their CV 11 times per month. Moving on to disruption, which is an issue that no doubt is in many business people's minds. In this session that I went to, the beginning of the end of business as we know it, which was sponsored by Wipro, a company that has 105,000 employees. Its chief executive, T.K. Kurian, is there on the right-hand side, had some interesting things to say about scale and how in future it is going to be difficult to build big businesses because many younger and smaller businesses are coming in to disintermediate into the future. Keith Wee, not in this picture, but he was also on the panel. He's the chief marketing officer of Unilever, made the point that individuals can now change the world. He shared with us the story of a young girl who didn't like a particular ingredient that was put into a soft drink and engaged with the company that made the soft drink and was told not to bother them any further. So she started a website, and after 200,000 people had signed the petition that she put on the website, that ingredient indeed was removed. But this picture really is to highlight disruption in the banking sector. And I put the picture, the cursor here on Valentin Stolf. He's a young man of 29 who has started a business called number26.eu. It's a new bank only on mobile. So you can go onto your mobile phone and open a bank account in the new bank in 8 minutes. He wants it to be the first pan-European bank. And the reason why this 29-year-old has started this organization is he says that people of his generation go into a banking branch perhaps once a year. They go online with their computers to bank perhaps once a month, maybe more active ones once a week, but they do mobile banking every day. So he said, why not just find a mobile bank? Because that's where people are going to. Disruption with a capital D. Another star of Davos is the lady you see in picture here. Her name is Christine Lagarde. She is the managing director of the International Monetary Fund. Dr. Kim from the World Bank calls her a gift to the world. But she's suggesting that those who are subsidizing the oil price give a gift to the world as well. Her view is that $2 trillion that governments spend in subsidizing petrol prices around the world be used now with a lower oil price to good effect. Put $1 trillion back into your accounts, she says, but use the other $1 trillion for education, particularly for the girls. Europe, I had the chance to sit in meetings with the two younger men in this picture. Mario Draghi was there. He's the head of the European Bank. He announced the EU quantitative easing, but he made a very strong point that quantitative easing will only buy Europe time unless there is an addressing of the underlying structural problems in Europe. They will be wasting their money. Interesting point. Watch for the underlying structural addressing in the way that we're seeing from this man on the right-hand side. He's a 40-year-old Matteo Renzi, and he's the Prime Minister of Italy, and next to him is the Prime Minister of Finland, Alexander Stubb. And the two of them are both addressing difficult situations in their countries. Finland has not grown for 6 years. Italy has not grown for 20, no GDP growth. As a consequence, the public debt, which is needed to keep the system going, has expanded rapidly in both of those countries, trebled in Italy over those 20 years. And what Renzi is doing now, with a mandate from the Italian people, is addressing labor legislation. Inflexible labor is a passport to disaster, the Italians have discovered, as have the Finns, and they are taking very seriously the story that Mario Draghi from the ECB over here is putting out, in that quantitative easing will only help if they can address the underlying problem. And the underlying problem for Europe is a labor market that makes it impossible to fire people, so you simply just don't hire them. Renzi says for many in Italy, they regard this as the only way, the last chance to save Italy. The United States was walking on water yet again this year. The most recent figures to come out of the United States show that the economy in the third quarter of last year grew at an annualized rate of 5%. Quantitative easing has worked. It has a highly flexible economy, so it didn't need to make the structural changes that Europe has to. But one area of concern is the growing view that it's becoming Fortress America. It doesn't need to get involved in the Middle East anymore. In fact, America stopped building aircraft carriers a couple of years ago. It now has fracking, it has its own energy supplies, and a consequence of this is that it seems to be looking more internal. It's got a lot of internal issues to look at, not least the developments that happened in Ferguson, the social issues that have come with the United States' unbalanced growth. But on the other hand, it is a country that does have many, economically speaking anyway, ideas for the rest of the world to apply. China is in good shape. President Zuma, down the bottom there from South Africa, was not able to meet with his BRICS colleagues this time around. Putin from Russia has been completely isolated now by pretty much everybody who was at the World Economic Forum, didn't want to have anything to do with Russia. And next to him, Dilma Rousseff, who was there last year, the president of Brazil, did not pitch this year, not surprisingly, because she's embroiled in a massive scandal of her own, Petrobras, which is now the subject of an investigation after tens of billions of dollars just went missing, some of it into her political party's coffers. So BRICS was not really on the agenda this time around, with two of the three absent, but we did have the Prime Minister of China, Prime Minister Li, and China's reputation and status continues to grow in fora like the World Economic Forum. It is a country that is doing the right thing and economically, and adding to a better world. India too got lots of plaudits and kudos from the World Economic Forum this time around. The Prime Minister Modi is regarded as a reformer and the first person who's able to really make those reforms in India. He has been held up as a role model, not just for his country, but for many others. Remembering that India is the second largest, has the second largest population on earth of any country, and is the largest democracy on earth. A successful India is in everybody's interest. Getting to the close to the end now, Africa was pretty much off the agenda at the World Economic Forum this time round. The Nigerians were busy with their own internal issues with Boko Haram and an election, so there were no Nigerian cabinet ministers whatsoever. President Jacob Zuma was not the most popular. He did manage to meet, however, with the president of New Zealand and the president of the Netherlands, but no real heavyweight meetings as you might have expected from, or as he's been used to in the past. The cabinet ministers from South Africa, though, were very much in evident. Nhlanhla Nene, the finance minister, made an extremely good impression, not just in his engagement with me, but with various of the business executives who were there, and you can see a few of them on this picture. They came back with a feeling, and I engaged with a lot of them there, that the South African cabinet is now realizing that perhaps it hasn't found the solution after all, and that public-private partnerships and greater engagement with the public sector could be the way for South Africa to move forward. I had a with Ibrahim Patel, the Economic Development Minister, in which he said we've done very well as a democracy over the last 20 years when you compare us with other democracies and where they were at that stage, but we're still struggling to find our growth path. Don't we just know it with maybe 1.5% GDP growth this year? Moving on to the impact of geopolitics on South Africa. Well, Poroshenko from Ukraine left no stone unturned, both with the media leaders and in the plenary session, in explaining to us exactly what Mr. Putin is up to, the Russians are up to. He described Putin as emotional. He says he doesn't know who he's going to be talking to the next time he picks up the telephone. He says he acts like an emperor, and he's a very difficult person. Asked by one of our number who understands Putin, does anyone understand Putin in the world? Poroshenko says he does not believe so. Putin is a law unto himself. A point that was made by Alexander Stubb from Finland, which has got a 1,300-kilometer border with Russia and has had their difficulties with Russia in the past as well, is that Russia was never going to join the European Union, despite the hopes that many had, because Russia is a rule maker, not a rule taker. The point of all of this, as a South African, we're a member of BRICS. Should we be worried that the R in BRICS seems to want to take on the rest of the world in a military conflict? I asked Laura Tyson, who's from the University of California, Berkeley, a professor there and one of the stars of Davos over many years, whether South Africans should be worried about being drawn into this conflict. And she said, absolutely not. BRICS really was an anagram that was put together. They have met or do meet a few times a year, but it's little more than that. It's not an alliance in the same way, for instance, as the Axis alliance was in the Second World War. The other impact from South Africa of inclusive growth is quite interesting. It's a point that businesses and politicians around the world are really getting now. You can't have sustainability if the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. South Africa understands this. We have looked at this through various legislative inputs. BEE is part of it. It's got its faults, but the purpose behind BEE, the thrust behind it, is to try to redress this gap. And sometimes you have to bring legislation in to make it happen. It doesn't mean that BEE is by any means a panacea, and it does have some really awful side effects. But South Africa, in many respects, on inclusive growth, is ahead of the rest of the world. And finally, the economic outlook for the world as a whole, well, with the oil dividend, that is going to stimulate growth. Unquestionably, it is trillions of dollars that have been put into the hands of consumers around the world, particularly for countries where oil is imported, as it is in South Africa. Both Rob Davies, who's the Minister of Trade and Industry, and Ebrahim Patel, who's the Minister of Economic Development, were very friendly, looking for answers, engaging in a most delightful manner, different to the way that one often experiences each other here in South Africa. Confrontation seems to have now been put aside. A reality or realization that South Africa has potential, has opportunities, but it needs to be addressing those cohesively, both public and private sector. Certainly, in my opinion, seems to have dawned. And the last little slide that our team put up there was to show that you can be proudly South African, and in fact, it's not a bad place to be right now, given what is happening around the world, primarily because the geopolitical issues in Europe and in the Middle East are able to, it's like sitting on a keg of gunpowder. The World Economic Forum gives 5 big risks every year, and pretty much every year, those risks, and these are to the global economy, are economically based. This year, 3 of the 5 were to do with geopolitics, and the biggest of them all was the war between states. Now, being geographically absent or far away from that, sometimes the tyranny of distance can be a good thing. In this instance, distance is not a bad thing at all. So that's the presentation in 40 minutes as we agreed to do it in. I'm going to just bring up some questions that have been asked. Did any person really stand out for you this year? And if so, why? There were a number of people who stood out for me. I think Poroshenko, the leader of Ukraine, is a man with great character. He's clearly a very brave person. He is leading a nation that has had dreadful problems to deal with. It has been invaded by a much bigger and stronger neighbor. It's got no military force to fight back with, but by sheer force of character, he has managed to swing world opinion in his favor, and he was certainly one. I also liked engaging with Laurie Dippenall, the chairman of First Rand, who made some interesting points about income disparities, just to show that in this complex world that we live in, nothing is really black and white, much is gray. He said, if you take those top 80 people in the world, and this was one of the issues that was raised at Davos this year, that if you take the 80 richest people in the world, then what they own is the equivalent of the wealth of the bottom 3.5 billion people. In other words, half the people on Earth. He said that might be so, but would you begrudge Sergey Brin and Larry Page of Google the money that they've made, particularly given that the invention that they have, Google, is available to mankind for free, and has clearly enhanced profit and wealth creation. Or for that matter, Bill Gates, the richest man on earth, who has, in the process of giving away all of his wealth, and his creation of Microsoft Windows and Microsoft Office would have added huge amounts to the to productivity and, again, wealth creation. So those are the major issues of the World Economic Forum. It has been yet another interesting year for me to be there, to have the opportunity of engaging with people from nations all over the world, people, the smartest people in my own industry, to be exposed to politicians, to academics, to thought leaders, and to come to the realization that 2015 is not going to be an easy year geopolitically. We can expect more issues coming out of ISIS in the Middle East. We can expect more difficulties from the Ukraine. But on the other hand, from a broad economic basis, the dividend from a lower oil price is enormous. This is Alec Hogg, for the last time, giving you an update from the World Economic Forum in Davos.